Welcome to the first episode of Drams and Dragons, a podcast about the fantasy genre and whiskey, and probably a few other things along the way. My name is Gus Berger, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Dustin Van Horn. How are you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great, Gus. And might I say that was a very snappy intro. I really enjoyed that.
All right. Yeah. So the first thing we're gonna do, like to do, is introduce you to the book. It is The Blacktongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman, and we will dive into that shortly. The other thing we're going to be doing is drinking a little whiskey. So, Dustin, why don't you tell me what you're having tonight?
All right. I'm very excited to share this whiskey and talk about our book. Tonight, I am drinking the Offerman edition of Lagavulin.
Ooh, good stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, indeed. It's regular Lagavulin. Not aged quite as long as what we're used to, but they use a couple different charred casks when they're aging it, and it gives it kind of a nice, unique, fiery thing. And because it's from Nick Offerman, supposedly it's supposed to be paired with steak. It's got the Offerman thing going on. Tonight we'll just be drinking it neat here in the office. So.
All right. I will be drinking the Green Spot, which is a single pot still Irish whiskey. We can talk about why I chose that for this book here in a little bit, but it's it's something I've never tried before. It's sort of a classic Irish whiskey, and yeah, I'm excited to get into that. Yeah, let's pour.
Sounds good.
I've got to open this up here. I've never opened this bottle.
Ooh,
so
exciting.
I'm opening it up just for this episode here.
Oh, I wish mine had not been open, but I have previously sampled.
All right.
So, Gus, as you open the bottle, what are your first impressions when you get that first smell?
I had heard that this had an appley, like a green apple smell to it.
Mm-hmm.
Does it ever? Wow, that is unique. Just the smell off the bottle here is unlike any whiskey I've ever had, period. Not just Irish whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
I'll pour a little bit for myself here. A little dram.
Mm-hmm.
I am looking forward to tasting that.
Mm-hmm. So apples right off the bat.
Yeah, apples, and more apples, actually, is how I would describe that. Get my nose in there. Yeah, I'm honestly not picking up much other than apples, but it smells in a really good way. Like it smells pretty incredible, actually. How about the Lagavulin?
Well,
The Nick Offerman one.
Yeah. Well, similarly, the nose is. I mean, it smells like Lagavulin. It's very peaty, very smoky. It smells briny. And there's a lovely sweetness, but more of I wouldn't call it a fruity sweetness with it. But that's kind of what the Islay Scotches are all about. I want the peat.
Yeah,
that peat
aroma. I'm a big fan of the Islay. I know you are too. I'm putting my nose back in again on the Green Spot. It's like green apple candy. You know, it's and now that it's sort of opening up a little bit, it's becoming a little more complex, but the green apple candy sort of dominating. So I'm going to go in for a sip here.
All right. And while you're sipping, one tip, if people are getting into sipping, a lot of people, depending on the glass you're using, the nose will change. And you can get some different notes out of it if you cover your glass with your palm.
Yeah.
And then wrap your hand around, and the heat from your hands.
Yeah.
You can kind of get. So when I do that with mine, I get some like a creaminess comes through, and more of like there's almost a chocolate creamy kind of smell that comes through the peat. So, but don't let me get in the way there. How was that first taste?
Yeah, there's some spice to it, just a little bit of spice, not overly spicy by any means. Very nice. Smooth, little spice. You definitely get the apple. How's the Lagavulin treating you so far?
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm really curious about the green spot because I haven't had that before. So the Lagavulin, it's interesting. I'm trying to compare it to a regular Lagavulin, so it would be a 16-year Lagavulin. That's usually the one that most people have, and this, it's got slightly less complexity that you'd find with the 16-year, but they've added more complexity with their casks that they aged it in. And so the two casks, I looked this up. I was excited. There's a let's see, there's a charred oak cask, and I believe they use,
Yeah.
yeah, they use a bourbon cask also. Let me make sure I'm getting that right here. Yep, ex bourbon, ex red wine cask, and that's been this lovely trend over the past God, a couple decades or so. Just all of these casks that they have out there, and these distilleries buy them up, and they just put their whiskey in them, and you can get some incredible new flavors out of them. And so with this, I would say that's the main difference here. I taste more chocolate and vanilla than I usually do. Usually Lagavulin, it's so briny. It's almost like licking a piece of like driftwood from the ocean.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
like you feel like a Highlander.
Oh yeah.
Just this though, it's got some extra complexity that reminds me of bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lovely kind of marrying of the two. And I actually would like to have this with a steak. I think it'd be a perfect pairing.
Yeah, I bet it would be good. Good pairing there.
Mm-hmm.
Man,
Yeah, and I guess
going back in for another smell. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
I get a little bit more now that I've had a little bit. More of the spice comes through, more of the sort of slight oakiness comes through. Very, very slight oakiness comes through. Yeah, this is really nice. I would have to say I recommend the green spot. Definitely, definitely. Next time you're over, we'll you can have some.
Heck yeah, man.
Yeah. So
yeah, likewise with the Lagavulin, I don't know. Do we have a rating system set up?
There's no rating system. I
we got to make
just
one.
Recommend it or not. Just recommend or no. Yes, no. Fucking binary, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I'd probably do a double yes. A yes. Well, I think for mine, so there's and maybe this is the American in me. I'm not sure. That I'm a person that likes new things. I like trying new iterations of things. There's something about just a standard bottle of Lagavulin that's wonderful, and it's got memories attached to it. I love the flavor of it. I can sit and sip it for hours. This is different, and it's like a loving retake on the original, like almost like an homage to the original that expands on it and it does justice to it. So it's a nice treat.
Nice.
Especially if you're used to the flavor.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it sounds really good. Be very interested to try that Offerman edition someday. So
same with the green spot. Thanks for sharing that.
So let's dive into the book, man. The Blacktongue Thief. Again, that is by Christopher Buehlman. And it is fantastic. You might wonder why a person might wonder why we picked this book to start the show off with. And I'll say there are a few reasons. The first reason, and you'll come to understand why this is important as we talk about the book, but it is St. Paddy's Day. It's coming up this week. The second reason is it's a fantastic book. And the third reason is the follow-up book is coming out in June. I believe the sequel, prequel is coming out June 25th. It's called The Daughter's War. And it's just about my sort of most anticipated book of the year for this year.
And how long have we been waiting for that, Gus? About 3-4 years?
Yeah, this Blacktongue Thief came out in 2021. So It'll have been about 3 years. So it's not, in the world of fantasy books, right? It's not that big a wait, right? When you compare it to Patrick Rothfuss or George R. R. Martin or the old Robert Jordan waits or whatever. Like, it's not that bad. It's 3 years for the next book. That's pretty good, I have to say.
That's a tough crowd right there for book waits.
Yeah. There's, in the world of fantasy, it can be a while, if ever, So.
And converssely, we have guys like Sanderson and just pumping them out.
Yeah, it's like one every year or even more, right? And I actually wish Sanderson would slow down a little sometimes. I think sometimes the quality isn't as good, personally, in his books. I don't want to take a shot at anybody. I love his books, but I think sometimes the quality would be better if he slowed down. I like the pace here. The second book, the first book, probably took him a few years to write. I don't, I watched some interviews with Christopher Buehlman this last week in preparation. I don't remember ever hearing him say, exactly how long it took him to write, but it took him a good while. I think it's a book that really, it's the kind of writing that takes time. He did a lot of, really sort of deep world building, and more than just sort of fantasy world building. He did a lot of ethnicity and culture building. The sort of,
which I think is one of his great skills as a
absolutely,
writer. Yeah.
Absolutely. I was,
which we'll go into
just
later.
Absolutely sucked into this world. And in particular, the world of the main character, the sort of culture of the main character, which is, it's not Irish, but it's Irish, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I did see an interview, watched an interview by a guy on YouTube who does, fantasy author interviews. His name is Stephen Arian, and he does these interviews with different fantasy authors, and it was a good interview. It was a pretty good interview. And I noticed that he started to say, they were talking about the culture of the main character, Shannick, or Kinshna Shannick, and he slipped up for a sec, and he basically just admitted it's Irish, right? The main character of the book is Irish. His culture is Irish. And then he corrected himself, and he sort of explained his process a little bit more depth. But I thought that slip up was funny because it was a moment of sort of accidental honesty, Yeah. And I know I read the book, and the voice of the main character just comes through as Irish. I started reading it even before I consciously realized that he was going for that. My brain it's such good writing, right? That my brain just automatically started reading it in an Irish accent.
Yeah, the pacing of it is it's like a book, if you've ever read to your kids or something. It's like some books just read better. Like Harry Potter, right? If you read it in a British accent, it just flows better.
Oh yeah, I read the first two Harry Potter. We're not talking Harry Potter here, but I do the voices.
Yeah.
I do various English accents for all the characters, and it flows wonderfully when you read it that way.
Yeah.
And this is like that. I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, and to give us a little bit of variety, I listened to the audiobook the first time. I purchased the physical book since then because I enjoyed it so much. But yeah, I think that, I don't know if controversy sounds like too strong of a word, but he uses a brogue. He's got a Irish brogue that he narrates his own audiobook, which is an achievement in itself.
Yeah.
It's not an easy task.
Not at all.
But he is as Irish as he can be with his shites and his all the different.
And he's from like Florida, right? I mean, he's not.
Oh yeah, yeah. But he pulls it off.
Yeah, and I mean so it's clearly written that way. It was interesting. His process that he talked about was this sort of thing where he would take a people or a type of broad group of people. So like for the people in the book who are called the Galts, or the Galtish,
Mm-hmm.
which to me sounds like a portmanteau of like Celt and Galway or Celt and Gaul, right?
Yeah, I got that
And
too. Mm-hmm.
it sort of it he'll take a group like the Celts and then he will create a sort of fictional Celtic group, uh, or in the case of like another group from the book, the Ispanthians, he was like sort of an
Mm-hmm.
Iberian people, not necessarily Spanish, not necessarily Portuguese, or I think Catalonian was the other group he mentioned, but sort of something in that
Mm-hmm.
vein, in that, and then he takes them and puts them into his fantasy world as a nation or a people unto themselves.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what he said that he did. Again, he slipped up and and called the Galts Irish just straight up,
Right.
before he got into that. But yeah, so I feel like that voice of that character, and not only of that character, but of this fictional people, um,
Mm-hmm.
just it's the thing that stands out above everything else in the book. And is a lot to talk about in the book. There's a lot of things that the book
Mm-hmm.
does really well, but that one just like nails it.
And you're absolutely right because it hits you. I mean, the first line it hits you like from the moment the voice is
Mm-hmm.
so clear and it's not hacky. Like it's not. It,
Yeah.
I've read works where authors are trying to imitate a voice or they're trying to kind of put a culture that's not theirs onto paper, and, and Christopher Buehlman just he pulls it off in a way that just pulls you in and the character comes alive and he creates that culture and much like my Lagavulin Scotch here, it's a wonderful homage and kind of a it it just ties in perfectly with with kind of what I would expect and even I in preparing for this I listened to the end of the book and again there's some of the phrasing he uses sounds almost like a like when you'd go to a bar and you'd hear someone giving a like a toast, like an Irish
Mm-hmm.
toast, and there's a poetry to it, and the way the words play together, it feels so good.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah,
I mean, it's yeah,
goes
it
down
goes down
smooth, you
smooth
might
like
say.
this whiskey. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
I do also get the sense, I mean, very much the character is somebody who spends a lot of time in taverns and bars, right? The character's sort of
Mhm.
a rogue. He's a thief, the namesake, right, of the book,
Mhm.
the Blacktongue Thief. Uh,
Yeah.
but I also get the sense that the author spends a lot of time in like bars and taverns and Irish
Oh.
pubs, and I don't know if that's actually true, right? I don't know if he actually
Uh
does,
huh.
but it feels so authentic. You know what I mean? Like it feels like
Uh
he
huh.
spent a lot of time singing, you know, getting drunk and
Mhm.
singing in pubs, and it yeah, it just has that feel. The writing has that feel of authenticity to it.
Right.
Uh, Sometimes, I would say often, when authors try to write those kinds of scenes and those kinds of, yeah, just sort of encounters and stuff, you often find that they've clearly never been in a bar, you know.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
It's just very clear. um
Mhm.
yeah, this one just feels right.
Yes. Yeah. I guess it goes down to kind of just like the basics you want out of a book. I mean, I want a book where I can have a suspension of disbelief, and I never once felt it fell out of that. And that's part of the magic of his writing, though, right? Like the way he writes it, he uses this. It's a first person narrative,
Hmm.
right? And then he switches to a second person narrative where he kind of talks to you or say, you know that feeling when this
Hmm.
happens, or you know this. And specifically with the bar, like I had flashbacks to when I was early 20s
Yeah, yeah.
and would occasionally go to a place of that type. And I was like, I know that look that he's talking about. And the using words to evoke feelings and memories is a very special skill, I
Yeah.
think. And
Now, and
yeah.
just to let our any audience or whatever, the anybody who's actually listening to us, to let them know a little bit about what the book is about. The book follows a
Mhm.
character named Kinshna Shanik, who is
Oh, Gus, do we want to do a spoiler alert here? Are we
that
doing that, or?
is the book's 3 years old. No,
All right, you are warned.
but you're warned. We'll do a warning. We'll do a warning. There's some spoilers coming. I will try not to spoil the, the big twists or the ending, but I will give. We might get into it a little bit because there's some stuff that's worth talking about. I think, especially as this prequel is coming up. So it follows this character. As the character follows an Espanthian sort of warrior who named Galva, she's a what would you call her? I mean, she's a warrior, but she has
she's laconic. She's very laconic,
extremely.
Right?
But she has a bird, a war corvid. So a big, it's cool. such a cool concept. She has a war corvid tattooed on her so that she can summon it with these tattoos whenever she wants. The world, they're traveling through this world that is, it's very grim. It is an extremely grim sort of, I don't know what the word would be. I mean, grim is pretty close, but it's a kind of depressing world a little bit. The world has gone through this series of wars where the humans and goblins have been seemingly perpetually at war with each other. The world is essentially devastated. Almost all men are dead. There are very few men in the world. Women have had to take a much more prominent role in society. Whole societies are devastated by these wars, and the goblins are still around. They've been beaten sort of barely, and they haven't been really truly like defeated, but they've been like knocked back, right? So for example, something there are consequences of these wars all over the world. For example, all horses basically are dead. This takes a prominent sort of place in the book. And like I said, all essentially most men are dead. There are very few men between a certain age. It reframes a lot of stuff that I think we kind of take for granted about gender, about the structure of society. So, for example, women won the wars. So once all the men were dead, women had to go to war. Yeah, and the world is sort of this devastated thing. Kinch Nishanik is this character who's just sort of, he kind of just doesn't give a shit about anything. I mean, he does kind of about some things, but he kind of just doesn't. He's nonchalant about just really horrifying stuff, right? Because he just kind of has to be. He's
a fox, basically.
I mean, he worships, like you said, he's the fox. He worships the fox god, right? It's why he's even alive, right? Is that he joined the Takers Guild, essentially like a thieves guild, right? That's really, one of the cornerstones of the book, right?
What would you say, Gus? A chaotic neutral character there? If we were to go alignments,
if we're gonna go D&D alignments,
not that there's any affiliation.
Yeah, no affiliation.
Yeah.
None at all. But if I had to give him an alignment, I don't know. He's pretty selfish. I'd probably put him in like neutral evil.
Evil. Yeah. There's trauma there.
Yeah.
And there's backstory, and they immediately get into it. I mean, you find out within the first few paragraphs kind of what his situation is, and all that, which is also grim. But
yeah. I mean, he's he's I mean, you think about the only reason, like you said, his situation is grim. The only reason he's pulled into this story is because he owes a debt to the Takers Guild, right? Yeah. He's not in the story because he's a good person or cares, right? No.
In fact, he's in it because he was trying to kill.
Yeah. Well, you can go ahead. He's in it because.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he is. I mean, at the very beginning of the book, there's an ambush, and he's there to rob the Espanthian that we spoke about, and that's what was so enjoyable about it, among everything else. You don't get kind of chaotic, neutral, evil And I think there's a neutral evil argument there. You don't get that very often in your protagonists, right?
Yeah, no, and yet he is a protagonist
Yeah.
and he is likable, right? He's not
Hmm.
just he's
Oh yeah.
even though he is very selfish and he's clearly not a good person. Like clearly,
Hmm.
uh, he's still that sort of casual charm and
Mm.
casual sort of gallows humor about the sort of hopelessness of this world that they're in is
Hmm.
is really, yeah, it's engaging in a way that I think a lot of books
Hmm.
heroes aren't.
And he does have a soft spot, don't you think? Especially with Bully
Oh
Boy.
man, I
Yeah.
there are not enough books for cat people. I because Bully
Right.
Boy that Dustin mentioned, Bully Boy is a little cat character companion. There's much more to Bully Boy than meets the eye. I don't want to spoil everything,
Mm.
but Bully Boy is a fantastic little companion. He's a little blind cat that Kinch Nishanik takes under his wing, feels sorry for, and keeps popping up constantly. And it's it to me anyway. I love seeing a cat in a fantasy book. You don't see little adorable kitty cats all that often, especially in like a grim dark book like this.
Yes. Nope, you don't. And I love it because it provides such it's a foil for our main character to learn more about him. It's not just a cute cat.
Absolutely.
There's something going on with the cat. Yeah, and you learn something about him by his interactions with the cat and what he projects onto the cat. But yeah, that's I guess if we're going how the story goes, yeah, he meets the Aspanthian. They end up going on this. Of course, he tells her that he was forced to go with her. He has no qualms about
Yeah.
betraying his guild's
Yeah. He
interests
he
because that's the
has
kind of guy he is.
absolutely no like qualms, right, about
Yeah,
betraying
yeah.
his guild, about betraying anyone, right? He's just
No.
completely, I mean, he's not going to do things randomly. He does things in a kind
Mm-hmm.
of calculated, self-interested way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense for him to just tell Galva, right? It makes sense for him to just tell her, oh yeah, by the way, the guild is having me follow you.
And maybe that's a good segue into kind of the next theme that starts to build which is the magic system,
Hmm.
because that's one of the reasons why he can be so laissez-faire, why he can be the fox. He's not without training.
Indeed. The next main character's name is Norrigal. That's how I pronounced it, Norrigal. Um,
That's
yeah,
yeah.
and she is a witch.
Add a brogue onto that.
Yeah,
Yeah, and you're good.
yeah. And she is a witch. She is also Galtish. Most of the characters in the book are not Galtish, but there are several. I would say I think there's three characters essentially that are Galtish, right? When you
Hmm.
include Malk into that,
Yeah, if you include
um,
Malk.
in the book, but there's these sort of the next main character, yeah, is Norrigal, who's this witch. She's an apprentice to this older, more powerful witch. Uh, and I found her to be a really, really engaging character in the book.
I do
And
too.
not just because she's like a romantic interest, right, for Kinch Nishanik, but just in her own right, the way that she's not just some super powerful like wizard. As the book unfolds, she's an apprentice and she has power, but
Hmm.
she's growing as the book goes and learning from the things she has to do on their adventure, right? And she also unlocks this sort of interaction with Kinch, right? She unlocks these sort of
Hmm.
interactions between two Galtish people, right? Where there's these sort of traditions between them and these sort of like the
Hmm.
moon wife tradition, right?
The Moon
Uh,
Wife. Yeah.
just as an example, which is a tradition where these two characters have this sort of temporary marriage, and they both acknowledge it's a temporary marriage, basically for one moon, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And the background there is right that there's a volatility
mhm.
to the
Yeah,
relationships. Yeah.
yeah. There's sort of this implicit, well, we might not live that long, right?
Yeah, and if we do, we might drive each other crazy.
Yeah.
Again, if we're going on big themes of the book and why it's such a great book, um, the what you mentioned before about kind of women winning the war and then women being in power after that. There's been a few books I've read, like notably Wheel of Time,
Hmm.
goes through some of this. Buehlman did woman power in a way that was very refreshing and very well done, I think. And again, like we talked authenticity and writing about people who are not you.
Absolutely.
So I thought, even though I'm a middle-aged guy, I thought it was a very well-written female character.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we could do this without getting too much into spoilers. The other thing that I thought was very, and I mean it's a huge cornerstone of the book, right? Are the goblins, right?
The biters.
Yeah, the
yes.
biters. It is the most sort of original take, I think, on a sort of a goblin sort of race. I think there's been this push in recent years in fantasy in general to sort of make monstrous races like goblins or orcs, or just insert one here, and into these sort of friendlier, nicer races. And I kind of understand why. I do understand why, but at the same time, like, sometimes you sort of lose that sort of terror of them, right? Like, and I feel like Christopher Buehlman was like, no, we're not going for like a goblin you could play in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. We're not going for like a playable race here. We're not going for like, World of Warcraft orcs. We're going in a completely opposite direction, right? We're going like, oh, you thought the Uruk-hai were scary in Lord of the Rings? Like, we're gonna be like creepy, scary horror goblins, right?
Yes, they eat people.
The literal.
They love to eat people.
Literally eating people.
They eat children.
Yes. Yeah, and it's not, and we're not talking about like, oh, this happens off screen, right? Like, there are characters who get consumed by goblins in the book, in front of the eyes of the character, and he doesn't. I mean, the format of the way the book's written, the perspective of the book. He's sort of the narrator, Kinch Nishanik. He's both the main character of the book, but also the narrator of the book. Is he shields you just a little bit from the worst things that happen, but at the same time, these things happen, right? And then there's characters that are happening they get literally consumed by goblins in front of the main characters, and you get that horror, right, that comes through, and it comes through, or at least it's a Christopher Buehlman's background as a horror writer really shines through in those scenes. They're terrifying. They're genuinely terrifying scenes.
Yes.
There's one scene where one of their companions, who's a sailor, who we haven't named, he's not a major character in the book, but he's in it for a little while. He's very likable for the bit of time that he's there. He gets consumed. And then I won't give you a spoiler on another one. Another character gets eaten by goblins, who's a fairly major character for a good chunk of the book. He's not, one of the main characters, but he's a solid side character, gets eaten by goblins. And both times it's genuinely like terrifying and claustrophobic and like horror inducing and, bile inducing when it happens. At least it was for me, just because the writing of it is so good.
Yeah, it always goes back to his prose, because his the perspectives he uses in there, they get you in there.
Yeah, definitely.
And he does that thing where there's this really subtle world building he does, like with the biters. There's one scene where he's talking about armor, like our Spanthian is armoring up.
Yeah.
And remember, he notices there's extra attention paid to the boots and protecting the lower legs, as anyone who's fought a biter would.
Yeah.
And there's all these little subtle things throughout that kind of, like a good horror film, they build it up like a boogeyman in your mind.
Well, and
and then when it happens, you're in their heads as they're being devoured.
Yeah.
And it's very effective.
One of the just to bring up one thing to add to your point is that one of these signs that anybody who fought in the Goblin Wars is like missing fingers, right?
Yes.
And they're missing fingers because they got bit off, right? Like, and it's a recurring theme, and there's lots of little things like that. So I just wanted to add that, because it was like one of the creepiest kind of those signs, where it's just like, oh, that's horrible. Like, this war must have been really awful. And it's one of the signs that somebody didn't fight in the war, like Kinch Nishanak, who went to the takers instead, right? One of the main signs is like, oh, they have all their fingers. They didn't fight. He has all his fingers, right? So, yeah, I mean, there's much more that one could say about the goblins. I think they're a major part of the book. They're a major part of the world.
I think to your point earlier, and this is another theme in the book that I really liked. Buehlman he kind of upends a lot of tropes. Goblins are a very common thing you see in a lot of fantasy. He made them scary. They didn't have a like a redeeming backstory to them that humanized them. You know, like you said, they're evil people eating things. But there were a lot of other parts of the book that had that same thing going. The songs are a good example. So in the audiobook, he actually hired a guy to sing the verses.
Wow, I did not know that. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. I'm one of those people, like, when I read Lord of the Rings, I skipped over all the songs. I was like, I don't have any time for this.
Well, I did that the first time I read Lord of the Rings when I was like a kid, and but then when I went back and read it later, I made sure to read all the songs, and I go. So I get that. I did not skip any of the songs in this. Don't make that mistake.
Well, they're
fantastic.
Really well done.
They're fantastically done. I could see a group of people sitting around like in a bar, like belting out like the Bully Boy song, right?
Yes.
Like row row, Bully Boy row, right? Like that.
They're funny. There's and again it fits back to that authentic theme too. They all feel like you could sing them like in an Irish bar with a reel going on in the background. Yeah, that's I feel like we could probably go on for a whole other hour about just the wonderful things about this book. It's
for sure.
It's just so enjoyable. Is there anything else like that really popped out to you this book? Because I know we're kind of running low on time here.
Man, I don't think so. I think we've touched on every point that I made a note of that I really wanted to talk about. So yeah, I really recommend it. Anybody who wants to pick it up and read it should do so. It is worth your time. It is grimdark. It is not a book. We talk about goblins, devouring people. It's not for the faint-hearted in a sense, right? If you don't like grimdark, you're not going to like this, right? But if you do and you haven't read it, do it. Yeah. It's fantastic. It's one of the better fantasy books from the last few years that I've read. And the fact that the next book is coming out has me so excited. I am super excited about the next one, which is called The Daughter's War. And it's a prequel that goes back to that war we were talking about where the women of the world signed up for the army and beat the goblins. And it follows Galva, and it follows the war corvid, basically the women of Ispantia who are fighting the goblins with their war corvids. And I just think that is such a ridiculously cool idea. I can't wait. I really, and if he does the same thing for the Ispanthians and for Galva that he did for Kinch Nishanak and the Galtish, it is going to be a heck of a book. I've pre-ordered it. I don't pre-order very many books.
Man, and I'm going to pre-order it as soon as we get off our call here.
Yeah, that was fun, and I might pour myself a little more of the green spot. It's pretty darn tasty. I have almost finished my little glass. So
nice. I'm getting there too. Experience was interesting. So I read it when it came out.
Yeah. So did I.
Didn't touch it for 3 years. I felt so pulled in, and then this was right after COVID too, and it was an interesting time, and kind of rediscovering the book after all this time. It was really kind of exactly what I needed.
Yeah.
And just thoroughly enjoying every paragraph of the book.
Yeah.
And I agree. I get excited thinking about Ispanthia because I was just amazed. I think I emailed you on it. Like the first chapter of the book, the world building he did just in that small chapter.
Yeah, just in the first chapter.
Was just incredible.
Yeah,
just completely sucks you in.
It does.
So
yeah, this is a book that's been kind of like living in my head ever since I read it. And I'm not, I do my own writing, I've written my own fantasy book while I was writing it. This book was just like in my head is like, okay, well, this is what I have to like compete with. This is what I have to live up to. This is what I have to like, cause it's so good. It's like for me
Cool.
anyway, it's like a standard, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
the bar has been set like with sort of what modern fantasy can look like. And I
Mm-hmm.
there's other books that are similar in that way, but this book to me has just been like living in my head for like the last 3 years. So
Yeah.
I can't wait to see the next one in a few months. It's gonna be really nice.
Yeah. Same here, Gus.
All righty. So should we sign off?
Yeah. Let's sign off. That was
Yeah,
fun.
that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, really enjoyed having this conversation and can't wait to do one next week.
Same here, Gus.
So
Yeah. Let's do it, man. And thanks to all of our listeners.
yeah, if you tuned in, thank you. Thank you. If you made it this
Yeah.
far, thank you very much. Yeah. Have a good one. Take it easy, everybody. Have a good week,
Yep.
and maybe we will see you again.
Take care, everybody.